Welcome to So and So, brought to you by Bernina, Made to Create. I'm Meg Goodman, and you're about to enjoy a casual conversation with special members of the sewist and quilting community. A conversation about how they got started, what inspires them, what excites them, and their connection to this community. In this special family-themed episode, we're delighted to welcome sisters Sue Nichols and Pat Holly, renowned figures in the quilting community. Both have dedicated more than 4 decades to the art of quilting, earning numerous accolades and inspiring countless enthusiasts worldwide. Pat Holly was born in Lafayette, Indiana during her father's tenure as a flight instructor in the Korean War. Though the family relocated to Michigan when she was just 6 weeks old, Pat proudly embraces her Hoosier roots. She pursued biology at the University of Michigan and later worked as an electron microscope technician at the Ann Arbor VA Hospital. It was there she met her husband, a pathology resident. Following their marriage, Pat returned to the University of Michigan School of Art to study graphic design, weaving, and fabric design. Her fascination with textile creation and historical textiles from around the world continues to influence her quilting designs. Sue Nichols was born in Ypsilanti, Michigan, and spent most of her life in Ann Arbor. She attended Eastern Michigan University, majoring in art. She married in 1976 and welcomed her daughter in 1978. Inspired by her sister Pat's baby quilt gift, Sue embarked on her own quilting journey by enrolling in a class at a local quilt shop where only hand techniques were taught at the time. Over the years, she transitioned to machine quilting and has been teaching machine techniques for more than 30 years. Sue's dedication to quilting has earned her numerous awards, including the 1998 AQS Best of Show for the Beatles Quilt, a collaboration with Pat. Beyond their collaborative projects, Sue and Pat have contributed significantly to the quilting community through teaching, writing, and sharing their expertise. Sue has authored several books and has developed her own rules for machine quilting. Pat's work reflects her deep appreciation for historical textiles and her background in graphic design and weaving. There's much to learn from Pat and Sue's experiences and insights, so let's jump right in. Pat Holly and Sue Nichols, welcome to So and So.
Thank you, Meg. It's great to be here. We're excited to share our quilting experience with you.
Yeah, thanks, Meg, so much for having us.
It is our pleasure to have the both of you. Thank you for spending time with us today. And there's a lot that we want to learn more about both of you. But I want to start right in about kind of the genesis of your sewing. Your mother taught you both to sew. Tell us about this story.
Well, our mother was an excellent seamstress. She made our clothes when we were little. We have some great images of us with some of the dresses and pinafores and clothing that she made us. She sewed on a Kenmore sewing machine. I can still remember the sewing machine was the type that you had in a cabinet and you powered the machine with your knee. And I remember when I started sewing on my first Bernina with the knee lift, I had a little trouble transitioning because I kept thinking I was powering the machine. So, but yeah, she was always very encouraging and patient with us. We started sewing doll clothes, which I think Pat can talk a little bit more about that.
Well, we were right at the age when Barbie dolls were a big hit, and I loved making little clothes, and that helped my mom show us sewing by trying to create these garments for our dolls. And I also learned how to knit, so I would knit little sweaters for Barbie. Our mom was always encouraging, and the sewing machine was right there, right in the family room. So it was something that we were very comfortable with.
And with you both being sewists, was it hard to share time on the machine, or did that work out pretty well for you?
Yeah, I don't really remember, fighting to get to the machine. I think we were both just, kind of patient with each other too. And one of I think a cute story though is that I don't know if you all remember the little troll dolls. So
Oh,
we would
sure.
we would have those little troll dolls, and Pat um, would make some little knitted outfit for them, and then I would make some little just cloth clothes for them, and just I remember that as a really fun experience because I have to say that Pat and I played well together as little girls, and then we play well together as adults. So
So I have to ask, do you have any of those troll dolls still?
I do. I actually have my Barbies, and I have some of the clothes that I made. I have the troll dolls. I kept them in a little those little sewing boxes, little woven sewing boxes that you
Mhm.
opened up, and so I have a whole collection of those crammed in there, and for some great reason, they got saved. My mom was they moved a lot, and she was not a big keeper of sentimental items, but she did keep those dolls for me.
yeah, yeah. And I'm not as organized as Pat at kind of keeping things, but I think I have a Barbie and a few trolls. So
Now let me ask you, you both began as sewists, and you made a transition to becoming quilters, very well-known, renowned quilters. How did you make the transition? What inspired you to do that?
oh my gosh, how did we make the transition from
Well,
being
I
sewers
think
to
it was
quilters? Yeah.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
our grandmother had made us quilts, so there were kind of some quilts in our lives, but we didn't really think about making quilts other than when Sue had her first baby, I made a baby quilt for her.
Yeah, and it's a really, really sweet little baby quilt that, interestingly enough, Pat made all on the machine, which was the only way that, she knew how to sew, and, I fell in love with this little quilt, and I thought, "Oh, I need to learn how to make a quilt because Pat made a quilt for my daughter, Jessie, and I needed to, try to learn how to make a quilt." So, I, had been a sewer, and it was around this time of the bicentennial where quilting was starting to really become a thing and popular, and so I signed up for a quilt class at the local quilt shop, which had just opened in a town near us, Saline, Michigan, and never, really heard of a quilt shop until then. And I remember going to the class and looking around the classroom and wondering, where are the sewing machines? And I learned that we weren't going to learn how to do it on the machine. We were going to do everything by hand. So I learned to hand piece, hand applique, and hand quilt. So the first few years of my quilting career, so to speak, I really, really focused on kind of precision piecing. And in fact, one of my favorite first quilts is a quilt called Wishful Thinking. And it was a class that we each week we did drafting even and kind of really figured out how to do precision, um, intricate kind of precision piecing. And it was a quilt that I entered in Paducah, which
Mhm.
was shocking that I even thought to do that, but I remember taking the finished quilt. I had joined a quilt guild by then. It was probably 1986, 1987-ish. My friends all thought that it was a great quilt and maybe you should enter it in a quilt show. And I had never thought about entering any quilt show. And I had a subscription to Quilters Newsletter magazine, and it talked about this quilt show in Paducah, Kentucky. And I thought, well, maybe I'll just enter my quilt there. And lo and behold, I entered it and it got accepted. And that starts a long history with us with AQS and entering shows and just working with them. And I thought, oh well, this is really easy. And of course, it took me quite a few tries after that to actually get another quilt in. So
And we'll be talking about, the AQS, show in Paducah later in this conversation because there's some pretty exciting things you both have coming up for this year. Pat, I wanna ask you about the Illinois Quilters Inc., and some of the classes. Now you've taken classes with some very renowned, people in the sewing community,
Yes.
Jinny
Yeah.
Beyer, Ruth McDowell, Harriet Hargrave, Gwen Marston. Talk about the Quilters Inc., and then talk about the influence these amazing people have had on you.
Well, when my husband finished his residency, so we moved to the Chicago area when he got a job, and this was in 1983. So I was pregnant with our first daughter, Emmy, and we moved to a nice little neighborhood. And I was walking our dog down the street, pregnant, and I ran into another pregnant mom who lived on the street. We're like, "Oh, yay, we're gonna have babies together." And we were chatting, and she said, "Well, what do you like to do?" And I said, "Well, I'm making a baby quilt for my baby." And of course, I did it all by hand and was quilting it by hand. And she says, "Well, you might want to go to these meetings we go to once a month called it's a Quilt Guild." And I actually had no idea that there was such a thing. And oh my gosh, it was wonderful. It was like I wasn't working, so didn't really have a good outlet to meet people. And I went to this quilt guild, and all of these lovely, friendly people were there, and I was hooked. And I had kind of considered myself more of a weaver and something, not really a quilter, but this was such a wonderful community to be involved with. I eventually did their newsletter for a few years because of my
Hmm.
graphics background. And I took advantage of all of these wonderful teachers they brought in and classes they offered. And that's what I totally encourage new people and people who've been quilting for a while. You never know what you're going to learn from these wonderful teachers. And yeah, I mean, I had no idea. Jinny Beyer, Ruth McDowell, and then the wonderful one was the machine quilting workshop with Harriet Hargrave, who was like our idol and mentor and mother of machine work, and then also our lovely friend Gwen Marston. And I think Sue is going to talk a little bit more about that.
Well, let me jump in. Sue, you learned to quilt from Harriet Hargrave's book, Heirloom Machine Quilting. And Pat helped you because she had taken a workshop from Harriet while in the Chicago area. And this was, boy, back in 1987. And the quilters in your area had not discovered machine quilting yet. So, tell us, was it hard to make the transition to machine quilting? And then I'm gonna throw a jump ball to the both of you, to talk about Gwen Marston.
Okay, great. Well, we'll love to talk about Gwen, but first, I so because I think we were sewers before we were quilters, we had this itch, I guess, to use our sewing machines, and we had started doing a lot of machine piecing. So that was kind of the first step into using machines, I think, in the just quilt world in general. And the rotary cutter and mat board and rulers were available. So we started doing this really great machine piecing and getting a lot more quilts done, tops done because it was quicker than hand piecing. And then you have all these tops building up that need quilting. And I was, just, grudgingly working on the hand quilting. And Pat had taken this workshop from Harriet Hargrave, and she brought home her little project to Ann Arbor. She was still living in Chicago at the time, and I like the light bulb went off. It's like, "Oh my gosh, you can quilt things on the machine?" And, we had, seen some machine quilting that was mainly just straight line work on some antique quilts. And, when I saw free motion quilting and I could do feathers, I love the feather design. I wanted to learn, but of course I didn't have access to Harriet Hargrave, but I was able to purchase her book, and then I did have Pat, who took her workshop, that I could ask questions of, and I immediately, like, "This is what I wanna do." I love machine quilting, and I, did a pretty large quilt, probably maybe a large twin double-size quilt, kind of a simple quilt that was a 9-patch, that I actually was doing for our Quilt Guild's, kind of, one patch challenge. They did challenges every year, and I did straight lines on the machine in the center area, and then I added a little feather, and I took it to the guild because they were having this, little challenge, and nobody in my quilt guild had really even ever thought about machine quilting or seen machine quilting. And after the meeting, I remember some of my friends in the guild said, "How did you do that? How do you get those curved lines?" And I said, "Well, it's free motion quilting." And they said, "Oh, maybe you could teach us that." And so I went to the quilt shop where I was taking classes in, the hand techniques and so on. And the owner, Mary Ann Rankin, uh, hired me right away and said, "Yes, you can start teaching machine quilting." So I had no, prior experience to teaching, classes in quilting, and I just really embraced it. And slowly, other guilds and other shops started to hear that maybe I would teach classes, and then I think my first like regional, I would say, was at a Toledo quilt shop, and then actually I think in the Chicago area, and that's how my career began in teaching machine quilting. And I always say that I think I was the luckiest person because I started doing it at a time when not there weren't a lot of teachers teaching machine quilting, and there was huge interest in it. People were really, really wanting to be successful at machine quilting. So I have Pat taking that class from Harriet Hargrave to thank for my really entry into teaching machine quilting, and then we went on to do machine applique and the rest is history.
So let's talk about Gwen Marston. You both have said that she was a big influence on your life, on the work that you do. Share with us how she influenced each of you.
Well, I'll start and just to say that I met Gwen by attending her Beaver Island Quilt Retreats. And actually, I think Pat and I we went to one of the first sort of quilt shows in our area at Somerset Mall. And we actually took a class from Jinny Beyer there, which was really exciting. And there were flyers out about this retreat. And I grabbed the flyers, and it was Beaver Island Quilt Retreat with Gwen Marston. And, we hadn't really heard much about her at that point, but I was able to convince one of my friends in Ann Arbor to go with me. And I think it was probably 1987, I think was the first year I went to Gwen's retreat. And we just absolutely loved Gwen's approach to quilting. And she was really, um, you know, admires and is inspired by the early quilts, and she had lots of antique quilts to show, and just her approach to, kind of do your own thing, but really good workmanship. And after attending that year, a few more friends signed up to go the next year, and then Pat, I don't know whether it was the year after that, she decided to go, and some of her friends. So we just became good friends with Gwen. She, I feel, was my mentor in trying to approach teaching nationally. She had been doing that, so she had some contacts. So she really encouraged me in getting out there more and maybe writing books. And so Pat can continue with her kind of experience.
Oh, I know. Gwen was just she's great. And the thing that most influenced me was her love of antique quilts and old quilts. And there was a series of calendars that came out called the Quilt Engagement Calendar, and it was a whole year, 50 or so quilts, a weekly calendar that were all antique quilts. And I have all of them that were published. And honestly, even to this day, if I'm trying to decide what do I want my next quilt to be? I can pull out those quilt engagement calendars and spend a lovely afternoon just looking at the old quilts, looking at how they pieced them or what they did on the edge. And I totally thank Gwen for giving me that idea, and her encouragement and her openness, her willingness to say there's no rules and there's no quilt police, and just just a wonderful approach to quilting and to life.
Pat, let's talk about your move to Muskegon, Michigan in the late 80s. You started a new quilt guild there called PALS, Patchers at the Lakeshore. Tell us about this guild and why the quilting community became important to you.
Well, my husband changed jobs, so we moved closer to our family in Ann Arbor. Muskegon's about a 3-hour drive versus the 6 hours from Chicago. And when I got there, I was looking around for quilters and realized there was no guild in that side of Michigan. The closest one was in Grand Rapids, which is a 45-minute drive. And I, of course, joined that one, but I thought we need something a little more local. And I had made a few friends that we started a little weekly quilt bee, but um, a dear friend of mine who I had never met until she moved to Muskegon, but she had lived all over the country. Her husband worked for the phone company and they got transferred all the time. So she learned when she got to a new area, find the quilt guild, find the quilters, and then you have a group of friends. And she actually called me, got my phone number, called me, and never heard of her. And we talked for half an hour, and we decided we needed to get together. And we found some other people. And she and I had both been involved in Quilt Guild, so we had, bylaws and kind of how you organize this stuff. And so between us, we managed to gather in a church basement and started that little Quilt Guild, and it's still going today.
You are sisters, which we established at the beginning of our conversation, and obviously you share many bonds, with quilting just being one of them. I love how you've said you play well together. Would you talk about what it's like to work together and the feeling that you have when you win awards on your collaborations?
I think that the first thing that probably steered us to working on quilts together was just that we didn't live really close to each other, and it was we felt like a good opportunity for us to see each other more often. And we both have two daughters. I have Jessie and Ashley, and Pat has Emmy and Alyssa, and the cousins. It was a nice opportunity to for them to actually have spend some time together. I live in Ann Arbor, which is where our parents live, and so Pat and her family will, come for holidays and all of that. So number one, it was a great opportunity for us to see each other more often. And, we both love to quilt and we love to share techniques and get advice from each other about, maybe certain questions we have about quilting. But I also think that we share the same standards, I guess, so sometimes you do group quilts and, you want everybody's blocks to measure the same and, kind of have that same standard. So we know that that's not gonna be an issue when we work on quilts together. And it's just a lot of fun. We start with, kind of the quilt design, working on that together. Most of our quilts, um, we like to share in the ideas, so it's not most of the time, it's not like one of us designs the quilt and then, we split up the work. We kind of work together from start, to finish almost, although there's been some exceptions to that. It's just, I think, loving to work together, and, I think that maybe Pat will wanna say more, but winning is also really fun when you have somebody to share it with, so so
Well, I will say that a very nice part about our being able to work together is that we're can be pretty honest with each other. I mean, we don't worry about hurting each other's feelings. We're going to be sisters forever, and that helps when if there's something that I'm doing that she doesn't think is going to work in the quilt, she'll say it. We don't have to, beat around the bush, and we work together to solve a problem. And winning, oh my gosh, the first big win we had was with the Beatles quilt, and it was shocking. We just were couldn't believe that we got that big award.
overwhelmed. It was probably
Yeah.
the best way to, describe it, but, yeah, it was definitely really fun. We felt like we were at the Academy Awards and, we won best movie. So,
Well, and
uh
even just the whole thing of winning awards and competing and entering in quilt shows, number one, it really encourages people to be better, how can I make this a better quilt? And then it's an affirmation. You how many things do you do in life that you actually get like an award for? And we also felt that our end result is greater than the sum of the two of us. The things we make together are even better than either one of us could do alone.
So you're talking about working together, winning things. You both have had and continue to have very storied careers. Is there do each of you have, like, one important moment or event that really stands out for you? And it might be the same, and it might be different for each of you.
Well, I would say it's hard to pick just one, but, definitely the Beatles quilt winning Best of Show. We, had no expectations on that quilt. It won in 1998 at the AQS show in Paducah, and it's kind of an unusual quilt, especially for that time, I think. It's a all applique quilt mainly that is, about the music of the Beatles, and I always call it kind of a contemporary Baltimore type of a quilt because it tells a story. Has really, bright, kind of wild colors, associated with the Beatles and, some of their album covers. So we were just excited to get it in. We had entered a quilt earlier, like 2 years before, called Blackbirds Fly, that it, it it won a third place, I think, in its category, and like that was just thrilling. I mean, just to get a quilt in a show is amazing, and so oh well, maybe it'll win like a second place. That would be really fun. And so when we were at the award ceremony, they went through our category and it didn't win a third, second, or first, and we thought, oh well, that's okay. It's kind of an unusual quilt. Never did we ever expect anything more than that. So when it came to the last award of the night and they show our Beatles quilt, it's like, "Oh my god." We were just very, very shocked, and Pat, had her friends, from her Muskegon Guild, I had my friends from Ann Arbor, and I mean, they were just hooting and hollering, and it was a wild experience. So I would say that probably if I had to say it kinda catapulted my name maybe a little bit, so I started to get more national teaching invitations, interest in writing books for AQS. So I think it really, for my career, it was really, really important. So
And then, of course, I agree with the Beatles quilt, but I also, just kind of personally for me, I'd started making miniature quilts and entering them in the miniature category. And that's a very, I don't know how the judges judge these miniature quilts because it's every possible technique. It's tiny pieces, it's tiny applique, it's whole cloth. So you're really competing with all different kinds of styles. And I was really thrilled the first time one of my miniatures, I think it won a third place ribbon, and it was a miniature machine applique quilt. And I thought that validated that it wasn't a tiny hand piece thing. It was machine applique, and I appreciated that they acknowledged that.
I'd like to talk about the Beatles quilt because you both have mentioned it, and you've talked about its construction and its importance to you, but how did you come up with doing a quilt about the Beatles?
well, that's a good story. I'm trying to think. So we entered it in 1998, and we had made the earlier quilt that was in 1996 together, and we enjoyed that experience working together, entering it in shows, and we said, well, let's maybe we should make another quilt. And we happened to be, I think, was around Christmas time, and there was a show called the Beatles Anthology on TV, and we were enjoying the show so much. So Pat and I grew up in the '60s, and just always loved the Beatles, and all of their music brings back just such good memories of our growing up together. And we looked at each other, and I don't know who said it first, but we should make a quilt about the Beatles. And that started the Beatles quilt. And so we wanted to make it about the Beatles, and we wanted it to be all original ideas. And so we started where we always start, in looking at early quilts. So,
Hmm.
Pat, you want to talk a little bit about the quilt that inspired the set for the
So
Beatles
you
quilt?
remember the name. I don't remember the
I
name.
think it is, the Sarah Ann Gargie's, quilt, and it's a top, actually, it's not even quilted.
It's at the Folk Art, the Museum of American Folk Art.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So the TV series was 1995 to 96. And that just got us listening to the music again. And right. So we did that. And then I actually, at that time, we had a little Apple computer, and I was, looked at the Sarah Ganges quilt and was using that as a guideline for the set of the quilt. And I have some printouts of, I was trying to figure out color placement of where to put. Sue needed places to do some machine quilting, so we were figuring that out, figuring out how to divide up the work. Each of the blocks is for an Beatles album, and so we each had our kind of favorites that we wanted to do. And then just went through all of the lyrics of the songs, looking for images that we could translate onto our quilt.
So we also went shopping together for the fabric. So we went home and washed it and then split it in half so that we each had exactly the same fabric we were working with, which is what I think keeps it a cohesive kind of a quilt project. And we just started to, we each did our own original applique designs based on images from the songs in the album, that we had selected. We worked on all of the applique individually. There's great borders on it. We kind of separated things out to keep the applique equal. I did the center Tree of Life, which is for the Beatles recording company, Apple Records. And then I think Pat did 2 or 3 of the borders. I did one of the borders. Anyway, we just kind of went through it all and tried to keep it very even. And and so we would then meet every so often. We were still living in Muskegon. I'm in Ann Arbor, and then we would meet at a quilt shop that was sort of centrally located in Lansing, Michigan. Then we would just meet whenever we wanted to get to the next step. Pat did the piecing on the quilt, and then I did the quilting. So it was very equal. Pat did the edging, and that's very similar to how we work on most of our collaborative quilts.
And this quilt will be on exhibit this year at AQS Quilt Week in Paducah.
Yes.
So people will get to experience it firsthand.
Yeah.
You both were in the first group of Bernina Ambassadors, and you've remained with the program for years now. Would you tell us what the Bernina Ambassador program is and why it has remained so important to each of you?
So the ambassador program is something that Bernina started, I think, I'm misremembering, maybe the early 2000s, and where they would invite people that were, I guess, prominent in the quilt world and sewing world. Mainly, it was quilters when we first started, I think, and a lot of national teachers who were sewing on Bernina sewing machines. And, so I think I purchased my first Bernina in 1990, so my 1090 in 1990, and, just loved sewing on Bernina, and, they would have a yearly conference, and they would bring all of the national ambassadors, to a facility. Sometimes it was in Chicago at their headquarters, sometimes, at another location, and they would just, like, introduce all of the new features on their latest machines, and, they would one of the really fun things about it is they would ask us things that we would like on the machines and things that we might, like to see improvements. And so really they were getting our input plus making sure that when we were out nationally, teaching and talking about the machines, we knew all the latest things that were available on the machine. So it was a kind of a camaraderie of um, sewers that were sewing on Berninas, and it was a really fun group. Do you have anything to add, Pat, to that?
Just that it was a way for us that love Bernina to talk about it more, to be educated about it. And, I've said there's so much of my work that I don't know that I could do on any other machine because of the flexibility of the Bernina, the adjustments you can make and with stitch width and stitch length. I loved the hand system, the knee lift, needle down. I mean, there's just so many things that when you're doing little intricate applique, just make it so much easier on that machine. And being an ambassador means we're showing the wonderful features that that machine can offer.
Right, and I think I'll just say one thing really quick. Talking about things that were a big deal for us in our quilting career, we were invited to go to Steckburn with the Bernina
Mhm.
Ambassador Program, and that was just amazing to see where the Berninas are made and the quality and care that the company has for all of their everything that goes into making their machines. And for me, it was exciting because they were so this was early on in when machine quilting was being used, and so they were really trying to those of us that were teaching machine quilting, like, what things can we do to make it easier for machine quilting? And, you know, back in the early days, the machines had very small arm area, and that was the big thing that we kept saying. We need bigger arm area so the quilts fit in, and you can see the progression of the machines having the bigger work area. And now Bernina has the sit-down long arm, which is what I use now to do my machine quilting. That just gives me so many great options for getting success in machine quilting the quilts.
So we're going to switch tracks a little bit here and talk about some exciting things that are coming down the road at this year's AQS Quilt Week in Paducah. You both are going to be featured in a very special exhibit called Two of Us Quilts by Pat Holly and Sue Nichols. And to tell people about this, the exhibit is going to feature 29 of your collaborative and individual quilts. It's going to highlight your machine quilting techniques in piecing, applique, and quilting. And the amazing thing about this is going to be fun, that visitors can gain deeper insights into your creative process through some interactive QR codes that are going to be by each quilt. And people will be able to see exclusive videos where you discuss your work. So, would you just kind of walk us through this exhibit and highlight some of the work you chose to feature and what people have the opportunity to look forward to?
It's just very exciting for us to have an exhibit of our quilts. Just to see them all together is pretty fun, and to see the progression from some of our early quilts to later quilts. I'm not going to remember the exact numbers. Maybe Pat can help me with this, but quilts that are in the National Quilt Museum. The Beatles quilt was our first award-winning quilt that's in the museum, and then the space quilt would be the next one. And, that is a quilt about the history of the US space program, or NASA, which won, Machine Workmanship Award, and is part of the part of the collection of the National Quilt Museum. And so those 2 quilts are just really fun to see. They don't very often come out of the museum, so they agreed to have those in the exhibit. Our collaborative quilt called Two of Us, which is what we named the exhibit after, which is a Beatles song, which we thought was really fun. And then we have individual quilts that we've made that sort of are a progression of some of our quilts through our quilt history.
Yeah, I've got a couple of my quilts that were in the museum. Paisley Peacock and Turkish Treasures are both quilts that I made inspired by my trips. I love to travel, so I've been to Turkey and to India and wonderful, wonderful places. One of my favorites is called Tea at Tenby, and I did. It's a little bit different than how we usually work. I designed the top and Sue quilted it, but um, we named it after our lovely friend Iris, who lives in Tenby, Wales. So we were thinking of lovely Iris, having tea with her. Um, and then there's some that we made as samples for when we were teaching a retreat. And then I have several of my miniatures. So it's going to be so exciting. We have not seen it yet. So, or I haven't. I think has seen it.
Yes, I was lucky to see it in Daytona, at their Daytona show, but Pat has, I think, 9 of her miniatures,
Yeah.
and which are really amazing, and, AQS made special, display cases for them so that they won't get touched and, are very safe. So it's really fun to see how, they put together a really, really nice exhibit. When I saw it, I was pretty impressed and kind of overwhelmed at how the quilts just look so beautifully displayed. So
And you both will be there where people experiencing this exhibit can meet you both as well.
that's right. We'll be there, doing some, I can't remember what they call them, gallery walks, gallery talks,
Hmm.
so that if people are interested in hearing us talk about each of the individual quilts, and then we're doing a little lunch lecture, so with questions and answers. So, and we're doing that also in the Grand Rapids AQS show.
Is there any special little known fact about this exhibit you can share with us that people might not be aware of?
Well, I think what's fun about this exhibit, especially because of the QR codes, you're going to hear, I think, special little things about each of the quilts. One of them that I'd like to mention is a quilt I made in the, um, oh gosh, early 2000s. It's called, well, I named it Le Panier de Fleurs, which is the flower basket in French. It was inspired by a trip to the Victoria and Albert Museum in London. So Pat and I, as Pat mentioned, we like to travel and look at textiles. And there was a wonderful French embroidery, cutwork embroidery piece that was very small, maybe 12 by 10 or something. And it looked to me so much like a quilt. It was a little flower basket that had little pulled work that made it look like little scallops. And I kind of sketched it when I was there, and I came home and I made this quilt inspired by it. I love the colors of it. It's a dark background with cream colored applique, and it visually is looks like a very traditional applique quilt, which is what I love. And I entered it in one of AQS's first auxiliary shows in Nashville, and I remember getting a call from Bonnie Browning to tell me I had won an award at this show, and she said, "Oh, it's you won third place," and I'm like glad to win any award, but oh, thank you, Bonnie, that's great. And she said, "You should be more excited, Sue," and I'm like, "Really?" And I had forgotten their format was totally different at this show. They only gave four awards, first, second, third, and fourth, I think it was, and my quilt had won $7,500, and it's like, "Okay, now I'm excited." So, and I also the thing that I like about talking about with this quilt is that it has a finish on it. It's a scalloped edge, and it was the first time that I had used any kind of interesting edge finish, and in at that time frame there wasn't very much of that going on. So after that, we started to use edge treatments. We have a quilt that has a loopy edge that Pat developed, and so I feel like we were like in the early trendsetter maybe, and now you
Hmm.
see all of
Hmm.
these wonderful edge treatments on the quilt. So that's I think a fun fact about that quilt.
Well, and I would say for me, a little secret to know about some of my miniatures. So when I started making miniatures and winning, when they win Best Miniature, it's a purchase award. So the first time I won it, okay, you can have my little quilt. But the second time, it's like, but I like that quilt. So I started several of these. I have made two. I made two quilts as I was sewing, so that I could keep one, and if it did win an award, it could go in the museum. So
There's much to look forward to from both of you this year in Paducah. So we'll certainly keep our eyes open for people to have the opportunity to meet you in person and experience this firsthand. You mentioned you both have two daughters. Any future sewists or quilters in the family?
Well, I have to say that my daughter, Ashley, I have 2 daughters, older daughter, Jessie, who has, my 2 granddaughters, and then Ashley is my younger daughter, and she actually is a quilter. She, was a sewed a lot when she was growing up. She was one of those that made clothes and kind of bags. She did a lot of, sewing with, really cute totes and bags, and she, started quilting, and she was teaching some modern quilting for she did Mancuso shows and then she has a book on modern machine quilting. And since that time, she's kind of backed off a little bit because she went back to school and she's in getting a master's in being a therapist. So, so she's not doing it so much right now, but really fun that she likes quilting and that we have that to share. And then the other thing is my granddaughters. I've worked with them when they're visiting. They live in the Philadelphia area, so we have them for a couple weeks every summer. And I've had them doing little sewing projects. And the most recent one that I can remember with my older granddaughter Stella, she made a tote bag, Taylor Swift, all of the Taylor Swift songs written on them, so that was really fun. We got her excited about making that, and then, my, younger granddaughter, Mabel, who, she I think that year she wanted to make shorts, and so she made some really cute shorts that she was wearing a lot, and, the just this past, Valentine's Day, I got a photo from a party that she went to, Valentine's Day party where they were sewing their letters, like, from their sports team on sweatshirts, and she said to me that, "I had to help people sew because I know how to sew now because of Grandma Sue." So, so maybe we'll have future, sewers and quilters with them.
Perfect. Pat, how about you?
yeah, I have two daughters. Emmy, my older daughter, is I would say she's more of a crafter. She likes doing paper things with cards. She has a sewing machine and she knows how to use it. And then my younger daughter, Alyssa, is she also has a sewing machine and she grumbles about having to hem her friends' pants or hem curtains, but she is a big knitter. She loves to knit. She every year will make a new sweater for her holiday season sweater. Um, and she and her husband just moved to Dublin, Ireland, so I'm sure she'll have lots of more fun things, yarn to collect and knitting to do. So,
Indeed. Sue and Pat, what's next for each of you, and what's your dream?
Well, that's an interesting question. I would say that I have spent many years traveling and teaching. And as the pandemic happened and I wasn't out there traveling and teaching, I actually kind of enjoyed staying home. And so I've cut back on the amount of teaching I'm doing, not completely done. I'm still doing things here and there. But I just want to have time to make quilts and, see what I can do when I have a little bit more time to spend in my studio.
and Pat, what is Pat's dream? I have always talked about having my own exhibit of my miniatures. So I think that's something I will kind of see how many I have and gather up, and or maybe with some other miniature quilt makers we can get together and do an exhibit. But I mean, people love looking at the little miniature quilts. So sometime.
So, for either one of you in our conversation today, we covered a lot. Is there any question I didn't ask you that you wish I had?
Well, I was just thinking about a couple things I wanted to mention, were really like when you said what are some of the more important things that happened in our quilting career,
Hmm.
and, there's 2 of them. So just if I can mention those. I was in the 2000s. I can't remember exactly the years, but I was invited to teach at Harriet Hargrave's retreats that she had in Colorado, and for me, that was like the ultimate, here where I learned to machine quilt from Harriet's book, and then to be invited to teach at her retreat. And I always say that I think that Harriet isn't remembered as much now because there's so much machine quilting going on, and people kind of forget what it was like, in the day of, "Oh, it's not a quilt unless it's hand quilted." I think Harriet had a huge impact on the quilt world. So I always wanna say that. And then the other thing I want to say is that another thing that was really a big deal for us is when Gwen Marston retired from her quilt retreats, Beaver Island Quilt Retreats. She asked if we would like to continue that tradition of the quilt retreat. So Pat and I, in 2014, took over, or the same facility she was at, and we had the Holly Girls quilt retreats for about 8 years, I guess, total.
Yeah,
The
that's
pandemic
right.
kind of put a nix on it, and we decided that it would be better to not spend our time with all that goes into the retreat, and do some of our own things. But that's a huge deal for us to have Gwen have the confidence in us to ask us to do that. So,
Pat, how about you? Anything I didn't ask?
Well, I think something. I mean, you kind of asked this, but something I would like to say is we are both just amazed at what quilting has given us and what the experiences we've had because of quilting. We just got back from a teaching at a quilting cruise to Japan. Several years ago, we were also on a cruise and we got to go to the Great Wall of China. I mean, because of quilting. So
Mm-hmm.
it's pretty amazing.
It has been wonderful to talk to both of you today, and I am grateful. Thank you so much for joining us. As our listeners would like to reach out to you, what's the best way for them to do that?
well, I have a website. It's www.sue-nichols.com, or you can just search for Sue Nichols, and my name is spelled like a nickel, like the coin, so Nickels. Because, but I think you'll get there even if it's incorrect spelling.
And then my website is pink-elephants.net.
Perfect. Sue and Pat, thank you both so very much for joining us.
Hey, thank
Thank
you,
you.
Meg. It's been
Thanks
great.
a lot.
Well, there you have it. Another story about people just like you. Someone for whom sewing and quilting is so much more than a hobby. It's a way of life and a connection to something bigger. If you know someone you think has an outstanding story, a story that should be shared on this podcast, please drop me a note to meg@soandsopodcast.com or just complete the form on our website. Be sure to subscribe to, review, and rate this podcast on your favorite platform, and visit our website, soandsopodcast.com, for more information about today's and all of our guests. That's SEWANDSO podcast.com. And finally, I'd like to thank Bernina for making this program possible. I'm Meg Goodman, and I look forward to you joining us next time on So and So.